Right now, somewhere in the world, there's a woman lying in bed thinking about a man she barely knows, not fantasizing, obsessing. Her logical mind telling her it doesn't make sense. Her friends would tell her she's bi, but her psychologicality is completely hijacked by Simone, who understood something about her inner world that she didn't even understand about herself. Carl Jung wrote about the shadow self, the parts of our personality we keep hidden, even ourselves. But what he didn't fully explore was how certain people can see into our shadows and reflect back aspects of ourselves we've never hacked. The forbidden secret Imabat to reveal taps directly into this phenomenon. It's forbidden not because it's unethical, it's forbidden because it reveals something about human nature that makes people uncomfortable. It exposes the gap between who we pretend to be and who we actually are at our deepest psychological level. The men who understand this secret don't just attract women, they become psychologically unforgettable. They create the kind of mental imprint patterns, rational, independent women, into people who check their phones obsessively, who replay conversations, who find themselves thinking about someone they've only met a few. But here's the warning. Once you understand this secret, you can't unknow it. You'll see it everywhere, in every interaction, every relationship, every moment when someone becomes inexplicably fascinated to another person. And you'll realize that the entire dating and relationship industry has been teaching you to focus on everything in depth, the one thing that actually matters. 1. The shadow mirror effect, reflecting her hidden self. Every woman carries inside her a version of herself she's never allowed to fully exist. Not because anyone explicitly forbade it, but because life, society, familiar expertise, and her own psychologicalness have conspired to keep certain of her personality safely locked away in what Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow contains everything we've learned is unacceptable about yourselves. For most women, this includes their capacity for selfishness, their desire for dominance, their attraction to danger, their need for chaos, their hunger for experiences that contradict their carefully constructed identity. The forbidden secret is this: women become obsessed with men who give them permission to access their shadow self. Not explicitly, not consciously, but through a psychological dynamic so subtle that it operates completely below level of awareness. Here's how it works. Most men approach women by appealing to their persona, the socially acceptable version of themselves that women present to the world. They compliment her kindness, her responsibility, her nurturing nature, her stability. They reinforce all traits she's been rewarded for developing. But the man who triggers obsession does something completely different. He sees and responds to parts of her she's hidden from everyone else, including herself. When she makes a slightly cutting comment, instead of being offended, he smiles with genuine. When she reveals a moment of selfishness or vanity, instead of judging her, he treats it as naturally human. When she expresses an opinion that contradicts her usual peer-pleasing nature, he doesn't try to smooth it over. He engages with it intellectually. He becomes a mirror for aspects of herself she's never seen reflected in another person's eyes. This creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. The uncomfortable psychological tension thought arises when our actions contradict our beliefs about ourselves. But instead of resolving this tension by dismissing Nan's perspective, her brain becomes obsessed with understanding how he can see her so differently than she sees herself. The shadow mirror effect works because it activates what Jung called individuation process, the psychological journey toward becoming a complete authentic self rather than just a socially acceptable one. Most women spend their entire lives trying to be good. The good daughter, the good student, the good employee, the good girlfriend, the good wife. They develop elaborate psychological defenses against acknowledging their capacity for being other than good, but deep in their unconscious, they hunger for someone who can see their full humanity, including the parts that aren't conventionally acceptable. The man who becomes unforgettable is the one who looks at her shadow and isn't afraid of what he sees. He doesn't encourage her to act on every dark impulse. He doesn't validate destructive behavior. But he acknowledges the full spectrum of her humanity without trying to fix it, change it, or make it more palatable. This recognition creates an almost drug-like psychological response. For possibly the first time in her life, she feels completely seen, not just the parts of her that are socially acceptable, but all of her. Marcus Aurelius wrote how much trouble avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does. But the shadow mirror effect requires exactly the opposite, looking so deeply into another person that you see what they themselves refuse to acknowledge. And once a woman experiences being seen at this level, every other interaction feels shallow. She doesn't just want you, she needs you, because you've become the only person who reflects back her complete self, rather than just the edited version she shows the world. 2. The psychological void becoming her missing piece. Every person walks through life with what I call psychological voids, empty spaces in their psyche where certain experiences, emotions, or aspects of identity should exist but don't. These voids are created by the paths not taken, the aspects of personality never developed, the experiences avoided out of fear or social conditioning. They're invisible, most people, because we learn to organize our lives around them. Like walking around a hole, we've become so accustomed to that, we forget it's there. Women become obsessed with men who fill these voids without even knowing they exist. But here's the crucial part. It's not about filling them through what you give her. It's about filling them through who you are in relation to who she's never allowed herself to be. Most women, especially successful or socially conscious ones, have developed highly controlled personalities. They make careful decisions, they think before they speak. They consider consequences, they maintain emotional stability. These are valuable traits, but they often come at the cost of suppressing other aspects of them. The psychological voids exist where that suppressed nature would have lived. The void of spontaneity. She's always been the planner, the responsible one, but deep in her psyche, a part that wants to make impulsive additions, to say yes to adventure, calculating the risks. The void of intellectual aggression. She's beented to be collaborative, to soften her opinions, to make others comfortable with her intelligence. But there's a part of her that wants to argue, to dominate conversations, to be intellectually ruthless. The void of emotional intensity. She's learned to modulate her feelings, to be vented, to process emotionally, but there's a part of her that wants to feel things deeply. Fascinated by moral ambiguity, by questions without easy answers, the man who triggers obsession does not fill these voids by being watches missing. He fills them by giving her permission to explore the parts of herself that would naturally fill them. He doesn't become her missing piece. He helps her discover her own missing pieces. This is infinitely more powerful than being needed for what you provide. This is being needed for who you allow her to become. When you embody the qualities she's suppressed in herself, you create what psychologists call projective identification. She unconsciously projects her suppressed aspects onto you, then feels intensely drawn to you as a way of her connecting with those lost parts of herself. But here's where it gets really interesting. The more authentic you are in embodying these qualities, the more she's forced to confront the fact that these qualities exist within her. This creates an almost addiction-like psychological dynamic. Being around Yadusent just feel good. It feels like coming home to parts of herself she'd forgotten existed. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." That psychological void effect works by ending her relationship with the limited version of herself she's accepted as complete. You become psychologically, not because she depends on you, but because you've awakened aspects of her identity that can't be put back to sleep. Other men bore her because they only interact with the parts of her she already knows. You fascinate her because you call forth parts of her she's never met. The obsession isn't really about you. It's about the version of herself she becomes when she's with you. But since you're the only person who's ever triggered this transformation, you become irreplaceable. Her psychological landscape chefens herself thinking about you, not because she wants to be with you, but because being around you is the only time she feels like her complete self. 3. The paradox of indifference. Why caring less creates more attachment. Here's the psychological truth that will disturb everything you think you know about creating attraction. The less you care about whether someone becomes attached to you, the more attached they become. This isn't about playing games or being manipulative. This is about a fundamental principle of human psychology that operates at the unconscious level. We assign the highest value to things that don't need our validation. Think about every person in your life who you find most intriguing, most magnetically attractive. I guarantee you have one thing in common. They would be exactly who they are whether they existed or not. Their sense of self, their interests, their emotional state, their daily choices. None of it depends on your approval, your attention, or your presence in their life. They're not performing for you. They're not trying to impress you. They're not adjusting their personality to fit what they think you want. They're just authentically, unapologetically themselves. And this self-possession creates what psychologists call psychologicality, not because they're trying to be scarce, but because genuinely self-possessed people are rare. Most people, especially in romantic contexts, immediately begin adjusting themselves to maximize their chances of being liked. They monitor the other person's reactions. They modify their behavior based on feedback. They've become hyper-aware of whether they're being received positively. This need for validation is psychologically repulsive at an unconscious level, not because innate validation makes you a bad person, but because it signals psychological dependency, and dependence signals attraction. Women become obsessed with men who demonstrate what I call outcome mindedness, complete emotional detente from whether she likes him, chooses him, or becomes attached to him. But here's the paradox. This detachment only works if it's authentic. You can't fake not caring. You can't pretend to be outcome independent while separately monitoring every signal for approval. Women's intuition for detecting neediness is highly calibrated. They can sense desperation even when it's carefully hidden. The forbidden secret is that genuine indifference to outcomes can only come from having something more important to care about. The men who trigger obsession aren't indifferent because they've trained themselves not to care about women. They're indifferent because they're so focused on their own path, their own growth, their own mission that romantic outcomes. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outsidevance. Realize this, and you will find strength." The psychological paradox of indifference operates on this principle. When your emotional state is determined to be internal factors rather than external, you become magnetically attracted to people who are still seeking external validation. This creates a psychological dynamic where the woman begins trying to earn something from you, your attention, your approval, your emotional investment. But since your sense of self doesn't depend on her response, you remain psychologically stable regardless of her behavior. Stability in the presence of someone else's emotional volatility is attractive. Most men become more attentive, more eager, more accommodating when they sense a woman's. This kills the attraction base. It signals that their behavior is contingent on her responses. The man who triggers obsession does the opposite. The more she shows interest, the more he remains exactly who he was before she showed interest. This consistency creates what psychologists call intermittent trigger, the most powerful method for creating psychological dependency. She never knows when her interest will be rewarded with increased attention from you. So her brain becomes obsessed with figuring out the pattern. BOF is the crucial distinction. This only works if your consistency comes from authentic self-possession, not from strategic emotional withholding. Women can immediately sense the difference between a man who doesn't need their validation because he's genuine fulfilled, and a man who's pretending not to need their validation as a manipulation tactic. The forbidden secret is this. You can't create obsession by trying to create obsession. You can only create it by becoming someone whose internal world is so rich that external validation becomes irrelevant, and that level of self-possession is irresistible, because it's exactly what she wishes she had for herself. If this video has revealed something about human psychology that you've never understood before, I feel ready to do the deep work of becoming psychologically complete rather than just romantically successful. Here's what I want you to do. Hit that like button and subscribe for content that explores the deepest levels of feminine attraction and psychology. Comment below with the word integrative. You're committed to becoming the kind of person who triggers genuine fascination rather than superficial interest. And remember, the goal isn't to make someone obsessed with you. The goal is to become someone worth being obsessed with. There's a difference, and that difference changes